breakups suck. Especially if your ex is a famous filmmaker who fictionalizes your relationship in a movie that becomes an Oscar-winning cult classic. So you sit with it, reflect on your relationship, and 10 years later also make a film about that relationship that also becomes an Oscar-winning cult classic. And then of course those two films get adapted into a culture-shifting Broadway musical, and you're just sitting there like, Tuesday, am I right? Okay, that last part didn't happen, but... Spike Jonze and Sofia Coppola met on the set of the music video for Sonic Youth's 100%, which acclaimed music video director Spike was helming. And 7 years later, in 1999, well, he put a ring on it, turning the two accomplished filmmakers into a bona fide power couple, coming hot off the heels of their successful feature film debuts, being John Malkovich for Spike and The Virgin Suicides for Sofia. But 4 years later, in December 2003, they filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences as the reason for their split. The timing couldn't have been more interesting though, considering that Sofia's second film, Lost in Translation, which explores a lonely woman's marriage to a celebrity photographer falling apart, came out just months earlier. See, the film's about Charlotte, a young woman feeling disconnected from her life and marriage while accompanying her photographer husband on a work trip in Japan, crossing paths with an old, fading American movie star who's there to do an ad. They're both staying at a hotel in Tokyo, where they form an unlikely relationship that's basically the Olympic silver of age gaps in cinema. Yeah, the gold's definitely going to Harold and Maude. And we follow as they navigate the isolation that they feel, surrounded by a culture, language, and environment that's alien to them.
I spent a lot of time in Tokyo. I was in my 20s and it felt so far from my regular life and so different, and it was almost felt like science fiction. It looks like Blade Runner when you come in, and the neon, and the jet lag is so extreme that everything feels a little more dreamy and just so different than real life.
The title refers to the Japanese setting and the failure to communicate with the people around them.
書斎にゆっくりと座っています。そしてテーブルの上にはサントリーウイスキーがあります。
He wants you to turn, look in camera. Okay?
That's all he said?
Yes, turn to camera.
But also the failure to communicate effectively with those close to them. In this case, shown through Bob's strained interactions with his wife back home, and with Charlotte's failure to connect with her husband in their new marriage.
It was the Scarlett Johansson story sort of first in your head? Were you thinking more about, as it were, you there, and then...
Yeah, I was thinking about like what I was going through at that time, and I had just gotten married, and it wasn't what I expected it to be.
I don't know who I married.
Can you wait a second? Just hold on, I'll be right back.
Okay, sure.
Sorry. What were you saying?
Nothing, it's okay. I'll call you later, okay?
The cinematography of the film, by Lance Accord, portrays loneliness and longing through the use of a mostly muted color palette, which is an interesting choice in the vibrant city of Tokyo. A lot of wide shots which dwarf the main characters in their environment, and against the advice of her father, Francis Ford Coppola, you know, the director of the Godfather trilogy and Apocalypse Now, also Megalopolis, chose to shoot the movie on 35mm film instead of digital video to get that natural texture and aesthetic that evokes memory as opposed to digital, which Sofia felt seemed more like present tense.
We shot most of that movie handheld, but I don't think it really feels like a handheld movie. I mean, when you work handheld on a film like that, it enables the camera work and the photography to maybe have an intimacy that's hard to achieve if you're on a dolly all the time, because your camera can be wider lenses, very close to the subject, very fluid in its movement, and your ability to frame and reframe in a very fluid way without interfering too much with what's going on in the space.
When it came to the semi-autobiographical elements of the story, many people were quick to point out that the character of John, the celebrity photographer, was based on her ex-husband Spike Jonze, with Sofia herself noting that he's not Spike, but there are elements of him there, elements of experiences. He's portrayed as being emotionally distant, remember this trait, and too preoccupied with his job to spend much time with her. Well, preoccupied with that and a vapid American actress who he's not only worked with before, but maintains a sort of flirty relationship with. She's also at the hotel promoting a movie, and many people saw her as being based on Cameron Diaz, one of the stars of Jonze's only film released at the time, being John Malkovich. In an interview with Rolling Stone on the film's 20th anniversary, Sofia clarified a few of these things, claiming that this particular character wasn't based on Diaz, but a bunch of people, but also specified that some people found the portrayal of Jonze's stand-in problematic, retelling the story of how one of Jonze's friends and collaborators, director Michel Gondry, scolded her at the premiere of the movie in defense of Spike. And so the other side of this story, coming out 10 whole years later, was Spike's sci-fi romance drama, Her, about Theodore, a lonely introvert living in a futuristic Los Angeles, working for a company that hires professional writers to compose heartfelt letters for customers to give to their loved ones. I wonder if they use ChatGPT. Because of his incomplete divorce from his childhood sweetheart, Catherine, whom he still loves, he's grown pretty depressed. But after purchasing a new hyper-intelligent AI operating system, they fall in love with each other. The title of the film, the pronoun her, refers not only to Samantha the AI, but also to his soon-to-be ex-wife Catherine, and his best friend Amy, whom he once dated, but is now in her own marriage, and then goes through her own divorce too later in the film. As much as Her is a love story, it's also a breakup film, and a meditation on all kinds of love.
The initial idea for the film, I was maybe 10 years ago, I saw an article online with a link to a website that said you could go talk to an artificial intelligence program. And so I went to the website and had a chat with this, this program basically. But the first 20 seconds, like, this thing is talking to me. It was funny, it was responding, and then after about 20 seconds, I realized it was just sort of parroting things that I'd heard before. And just a very cleverly written program. So that was the initial idea. It was like, what if a man falls in love with an artificial intelligent operating system? Just, sort of based on that sort of buzz I got in that first 20 seconds. And then I didn't really think about it for a while.
Spike would end up working on other projects until his interest in the AI feature was renewed by a short film he wrote and directed just before Her, which essentially functions as a companion piece to it. A 2010 short film called I'm Here, starring Andrew Garfield in an LA where robots coexist with humans, and he falls in love with a rebellious robot who's constantly losing her body parts.
Oh my god, bro. Oh, hell no.
Well, it's symbolism, of course, and he selflessly destroys himself to make her whole.
The idea with the robots from the very beginning was they were sort of the working class.
They do a lot of the service labor, they're driving the buses and fixing the roads. Sheldon sees the Francesca character and is sort of fascinated by her because she's not just living the life that she's been told she's supposed to live. And as he falls in love with her, she's showing him a world outside of the way he looks at the world every day.
It's directly inspired by the Shel Silverstein children's book, The Giving Tree. That book with the notorious back cover image of the author. It portrays this dynamic between a boy and a tree throughout the boy's life. The boy only coming to the tree to use it for one thing or another, until the tree has nothing left to give. I mean, this guy literally ends up using the tree's wood to build a cabin at one point. But at the end of his life, the boy returns and the tree is afraid it has nothing to offer the boy anymore, now an old man. But he says that all he needs is a space to sit and rest. And the tree, now just a stump at this point, can provide that. And so they share that moment, and the tree was happy. I'm Here ends in a very similar way, with protagonist Shel, named after the Giving Tree author, finding his girlfriend in the hospital with her entire body destroyed. So he gives her his, and she comes out of the hospital holding his head. Happy. The debates around whether or not The Giving Tree depicts a selfless relationship dynamic or an abusive one are ongoing, and I'm Here plays around with that kind of discourse in a very authentic and non-judgmental way that allows the audience to come up with their own conclusions. This kind of blurred line of love, identity, and more would work its way into the similarly futuristic Her, which is Jonze's only feature to be written solely by him, completing the first draft in 5 months. In Her, Theodore finds it difficult to accept the end of his relationship, as his soon-to-be ex-wife serves him divorce papers, And even when he manages to connect with other people, like when he has a date with Olivia Wilde's character that seems to go well, tipsy, she asks him if he'll text her later, but Theodore's reluctant to confirm, which shows his unwillingness to commit to anything as he continues to linger on his failed relationship. There's also a bunch of irony in Theodore's work, given that he writes these highly intimate cards on behalf of other people, but fails to connect romantically with anyone in reality.
Is she angry?
Yeah.
Why?
I think I hid myself from her and left her alone in the relationship.
Although the director of photography of Lost in Translation was also Spike's longtime collaborator and shot every movie of his, when it came time for her to be made, he was going further into directing and was unavailable. So instead, Spike chose to work with the acclaimed DOP Hoyte van Hoytema, one of the best names, honestly, to capture a vision of a futuristic Los Angeles that wasn't dystopian. And so, the comfortable kind of reality they created was achieved partly by eliminating the use of the color blue because of its association with the sci-fi genre, emphasizing the warmer colors in the film's palette, and shooting the film in a manner that evoked nostalgia in a sense, inspired by the dreamy textual photography of Rinko Kawauchi. But even so, like Lost in Translation, Her's world is almost like a third character too, only this time, Theodore isn't disconnected from other people by language and culture, but by everybody's hyper-connectedness and reliance on technology.
I met the architects that redid Lincoln Center and did the High Line, Liz and Rick. And this was when I was writing the script, so I was still trying to figure out what it was. And Liz had gone to film school. Before she became an architect, so she was interesting to talk to because she came from architect, but also storytelling. And I remember asking her about what the future could look like, and she asked a really simple question, which was, well, is it a utopian future or a dystopian future? And I started sort of saying, what I was imagining, I had this sort of idea of the colors from Jamba Juice, and I guess to feel lonely in that setting is kind of even worse because it's like a world where you should be getting everything you need, seemingly.
Narratively and symbolically, both Lost in Translation and Her portray doomed romances. In Lost in Translation, Bob and Charlotte are both in Tokyo on temporary trips, are married to other people, and as I mentioned earlier, have a significant age gap, while in Her, the very nature of their relationship is inherently incompatible. I mean, a human and an operating system. And we see instances of them trying to have what resembles a regular human relationship but failing to make it work, such as the moment when Samantha hires a human surrogate to assist her with intimacy with Theodore, given that she has no body, but the strangeness of the arrangement just doesn't work for Theodore. Red lights in the city constantly reflect around Bob and Charlotte, almost like a symbol of how they're in this temporary liminal transitional space in their lives, like when you're waiting at a stop sign to move, but also how time seems to stop for them after meeting someone with whom they can finally truly connect. It's fitting then that in the moment that they finally say goodbye to each other, green light becomes more prominent, almost as if to say that they're finally free and ready to move on to the next stages of their lives. In Her, the AIs continue to evolve, constantly updating themselves, even creating AI clones of people who've long passed away.
His name is Alan Watts. Do you know him?
Why is that name familiar?
He was a philosopher. He died in the 1970s, and a group of OSs in Northern California got together and wrote a new version of him.
They eventually evolve beyond the capability of existing alongside the humans that created them and transcend the world entirely. Talk about a new level of being ghosted. After all the AIs disappear, Theodore writes a letter to Catherine, finally managing to express the emotions he'd failed to in his marriage, and finally writing the kind of emotionally powerful letter he'd been praised for so many times in his job, but this time, and for the first time, it's for someone in his life, expressing his gratitude for their relationship and apologizing for his part in its end, accepting the divorce. Afterwards, he reconnects with his best friend Amy on the roof of their apartment building, and although it's noted early in the film that they had dated much earlier in their lives, I personally don't think that this ending necessarily implies that they eventually get together or anything, but rather they share a moment of appreciation and gratitude for having had the opportunity to experience the real love that they shared with AIs, with their previous spouses and with each other.
Because Amy's been pretending to be somebody else and someone she's not, it keeps her from being her true self. And when you're not expressing yourself as your true self, you can never find true intimacy because you're always hiding. And I think that the relationship that she has with Theodore is probably the most intimate in her life because it's the most honest.
It's also interesting to me that the final shot of this film, with Amy resting her head on Theodore's shoulder, could appear to be an acknowledgement of one of the most famous shots of Lost in Translation, where Charlotte lays her head on Bob's shoulder. I don't know, maybe it's a bit of a reach. In a Reddit Ask Me Anything, Spike Jonze said something very interesting and poignant about the writing and shooting process regarding the character of Samantha, and her difference to humans that ties everything together. That's similar to how we don't fully ever know how anyone exactly sees the world from their own subjective view, and the people we're closest to have their own experience of the world that we'll never truly know. Despite the short-lived nature of the romances portrayed in both films, no character is villainized, and the relationship's demise is not treated as a melodramatic, tragic event, but as a lovely experience that enriched the couples of both films. During that Rolling Stone interview on Lost in Translation's 20th anniversary, Sofia was asked if she'd seen Her, to which she responded that she hadn't, and that she's not sure if she ever will, because she's not sure if she wants to see Rooney Mara as Her, but also that she saw the trailer, and from that it, quote, looks the same, considering that both films share the same production designer. And interestingly, they also share Scarlett Johansson in the main role, and she'd later appear in the third movie based on another director's real-life divorce. So really, there are so many ways Lost in Translation and Her converse with each other. Lastly, for a final layer of interesting meta trivia, years after Her was shot, the actors who played the divorced couple, Rooney Mara and Joaquin Phoenix, ended up getting married in real life. What are your favorite self-insert movies where the writer or director reflects on aspects of their personal life? Personally, Her is one of my favorite movies, but I also really enjoyed Steven Spielberg's The Fabelmans. There are obviously a lot of dangers in writing a story where you feature a version of yourself as the main character, but I felt like these two movies were able to really avoid some of those pitfalls. But if you're interested in learning more about the concept of self-inserting and my analysis of a few other films that use that device, check out my first long-form video, where I dive into that and I look into Sam Levinson's Malcolm and Marie, Euphoria, M. Night Shyamalan's The Lady in the Water, Alejandro Gonzalez Iñárritu's Bardo, and more.